Hello, it's the Finnish Bolshevik. I'm with DemocraticSocialist01.
Hello everyone.
Yeah, and we're just gonna have a little talk about some current things relating to imperialism, kinda just inspired by the recent developments in Syria. The US has basically attacked the Syrian government. Like, they used to use proxies, they used to support the FSA and like other Islamic terrorist forces against the Assad government, but now they've outright attacked government forces themselves.
They claim it was a gas attack, some type of nerve gas, wasn't it? Or
Yeah, they claim that Assad used chemical weapons,
yeah, chemical weapons.
and therefore they attacked the Assad government, which this is an interesting development to me because of course Russia supports Assad, and with the election of Donald Trump, the relations between the US and Russia have seemed to be like they might have started to improve, but now this is like the thing that would obviously escalate everything, and it just seems like a crazy thing to do. Like, why? I mean, obviously the reason why they attack Assad is because they want to oust him, and they know that ISIS and their proxies are failing, but it just seems like such a crazy thing to do, like to risk like World War III.
Yeah. Why would Assad use chemical weapons? They're clearly winning the war, and using such weapons would just give the foreign powers an excuse to invade or step up their involvement and aid to his opposition.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's no good reason, I mean, which seems to indicate that he probably didn't. It seems like it was basically made up by the imperialists to allow, like, to give them an excuse to attack Assad, because Assad did the opposite. Like, when the whole civil war started and when the US and its allies was accusing Assad of using chemical weapons in the first place to justify an invasion into Syria, what Assad did is he made a deal with Russia and with the UN, and he allowed UN inspectors to monitor the destruction of all of Syria's chemical weapons. That eliminated the excuse that the US had to invade Syria, which is presumably is why the US didn't invade Syria against the government to begin with. So it just seems like a crazy thing to do. Like, if Assad was so willing to capitulate and like outright destroy all the chemical weapons and allow UN people to come in and make sure that the chemical weapons are all gone and everything, why would he now make a crazy move and start using chemical weapons?
Yeah, that was the point made in a New York Times article called The Grim Logic Behind Syria's Chemical Weapon Attack. The opening paragraph says, the diplomatic situation has been looking bright for President Bashar al-Assad of Syria. With the help of Russia, he had consolidated his power, the rebels were on their heels, and the United States had just declared that ousting him was not a priority. So why would Mr. Assad risk it all?
It's interesting because they outright admit, like the article seems to outright admit that the rebels are losing and that Assad is basically gonna stay unless something crazy happens. And now, like, what do you know, something crazy happens.
I'm against people who have decided using chemical weapons against civilians. Why would you, do it? It's not only inhumane, but it's bad publicity.
Yeah, doesn't seem to be many benefits to using chemical weapons, but
I just want more proof who the perpetrator was.
yeah, exactly.
So, whoever was the perpetrator, they've committed a terrible war crime. I'm not defending that, but,
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I suppose it could be Assad. It just seems unlikely.
Yeah, it would be totally idiotic if he's winning the war. And Trump, during his campaign, constantly attacked the Democrats for their, support for the Syrian rebels, and he constantly warned against intervention. So Bashar al-Assad would have known that, and so why would he, choose to aggravate Trump? Like, war crimes like this is almost an invitation to invade.
that is what people were saying already at the beginning of the Syrian civil war, that it's like almost exactly the same thing as it was with Iraq, when they said that Iraq did 9/11 and Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Now, of course, neither one of those things were true. It was so similar when they started saying that Assad is using chemical weapons, Assad is using chemical weapons, and there's never been, like, really that good proof or evidence towards that. Like, chemical weapons have been used, but the rebels are using them. That, I think that has been established, but there's always uncertainty, because the rebels are not necessarily a monolithic group.
It's all different factions, just like the rebel forces in Libya. And how did that turn out?
Once again, it's the height of hypocrisy and the height of irony, because of course the United States is notorious for using chemical weapons like napalm and Agent Orange in Vietnam, but even more recently when they were the ones who gave chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein. The thing that Western media that is funded, supported, and partially controlled by the imperialists, what the Western media likes to do towards any country, whether it be North Korea or Iran or Russia or whatever country that happens to be the target, they tend to try to create this narrative that they are not rational actors, so therefore, like, all these crazy things that they supposedly do can be explained because they aren't rational actors. Like, North Korea is of course the biggest example of this. They make crazy accusations about North Korea and they justify them by saying, well, North Korea is just a crazy country, so they just act crazy all the time. Now it seems like that's their Syria argument. Popular term used to be a rogue nation. They used to say that North Korea is a rogue nation, it's irrational. But, I mean, if any country is a rogue country, it will be the US. Like, no one else attacks other countries aggressively, illegally, the same way that the US does.
If the US does invade Syria, what will your country do? You think? What would Finland do?
What would we do? It's hard to say, because so far Finland has pretty much been, like, ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, I would say Finland has pretty much been a total yes man to whatever America does. But now with Trump, like, the Finnish media has really latched on to this idea that Trump is a Russian puppet, or like an ally of Russia. For like the longest time, the Finnish media has pushed a very pro-NATO narrative, a very anti-Russian narrative, to try to force Finland into NATO. And now what they're doing is they're trying to say that we should join NATO even harder, because now even the Americans are like pro-Russia. So it's hard to say. Like, normally I would say that Finland would support the US in everything they do, but now with Trump it's more complicated.
Okay. So have you got a conservative government, or
pretty much,
does
like,
it matter? Does that determine the foreign policy? Or
well, basically what we have, like, it's kind of a similar situation to the US. Like, is the US policy really all that different depending on if it's the Democrats or the Republicans? I mean, not really. It's pretty much the same thing here. Like, we have 3 or 4 big parties. One of them is like Social Democratic Party, the Coalition Party, as they call it, which is a neoliberal party, and then there's a centrist party and a nationalist party. But all 4 of those parties are very similar in like all the ways that actually matter. Like, they all support NATO, so in that sense the foreign policy is identical. They're all parties of the rich and the capitalists, and the current government is a coalition of the most right-wing of all of them, is the Center Party, the neoliberal, and the Nationalist Party.
okay. Well, my country, Australia, in its first 50 years after Federation, it was following Britain everywhere. Britain was seen as the mother country. Like, one of our prime ministers during I think it was when the the outbreak of the First World War. He said something like, well, we'll stand beside the mother country to help and defend her to the last man and to the last shilling.
Wow.
Yeah, so that continued, and then in the 1940s we had a break with Britain, and the Prime Minister said we look to America instead. I make it quite clear that Australia looks to America, free from any pains to our traditional links of or kinship with the United Kingdom. So my country really has never pursued a independent foreign policy. Or maybe it was in a 3-year period of the Whitlam government. That was the closest we came, but the rest of the time we've just basically either followed the British or the Americans.
Interesting.
So if America goes to war with Syria, Australia will definitely follow, especially if we have the Liberals in power, and they're in power at the moment. Although they're very unpopular, they're 10 points behind, and that's a lot in Australian politics. So
I suppose Finland hasn't really tried to strive for an independent policy, for like foreign policy either, for like a lot of its history. Before World War II, we were closely allied with Germany, and of course during the war we were closely allied with Germany, and like recently we've been close with the US, but when we had good relations with the Soviet Union, that is when Finland followed a neutral foreign policy, as they call it, but I mean, some would say that it was a kind of a pro-Soviet policy.
okay, that surprises me.
Well, I mean, we had a lot of economic cooperation with the Soviet Union, and we also had a mutual defense treaty with the Soviet Union. That was a condition of the war. Since we lost the war, the Soviets wanted a mutual defense treaty. Like, that's what the whole Winter War was about. Like, the Soviets wanted to make sure that nobody could use Finland to attack them, which, of course, you know, that happened.
They removed, I think it was Horthy of Hungary, or Antonescu of Romania.
Yeah.
They removed all the, fascist puppets and,
Of course, Poland, like, the Soviets occupied eastern Poland when the Polish government collapsed to stop the Nazis from taking it. But even so, like, I would say when it comes to the Eastern European countries, like, when the Nazis were defeated, the anti-fascist forces of all those countries essentially became their governments, and I would say that because those forces were predominantly communist, they would have come to power even without any Soviet involvement. Like, there was really, I mean, it was the power vacuum. Sure. Like, when the Nazis were gotten rid of, all that was left was the communist-led anti-fascist forces.
Yeah, like, even Tito, who, he was a communist, but he wasn't exactly pro-Soviet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a funny thing. Like, people talk about Soviet puppets, but really the Soviet-backed countries have been kind of like, if you actually thought about them as puppets, they've been like rather bad puppets, because they've tended to be like pretty independent. Tito and Ceausescu was anti-Soviet for a while, and the East Germany wasn't exactly anti-Soviet, but they were more independent. I mean, Korea, they were all like, they all kind of did their own thing, like, not to even mention Albania. A conversation that we were having in Skype with like a bunch of comrades was, we were talking about, like, I would say that every American president has attacked a foreign country. I can't really think of any American president that hasn't done that.
What about Roosevelt, FDR? He pursued a isolationist policy in the first years of his government.
Maybe World War II is a bit of an exception, but...
Well, the years before World War II, after that, they were extremely aggressive.
Yeah.
Because, they were basically the undisputed power besides the Soviet Union, which suffered a lot more than the US did during the Second World War.
Yeah.
The US worried about, a country that in 1918 was in ruins, and then by 1945, after the same country that was in ruins in 1918 had fought off the greatest invasion in history, then they were worried about competing with a nation that had just been devastated.
Yeah, and the U.S. even attacked the Soviet Union in, I think it was 1920, in the Civil War.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, even if the U.S. was isolationist, they still, they had Cuba, they had, I mean, they still have Hawaii, but they also have, the Philippines was a colony of the US. Like, some people at least, they think that US imperialism is like a really recent thing that started like post-World War II. Like, nah, it's always kind of been like that. But we were thinking, like, since every American president pretty much has attacked one or several other countries, like Obama started several wars and extended and continued, like, Bush's wars, like, what is Trump gonna do? Like, what's going to be the next one?
He was a fan of drone strikes, wasn't
he? Yeah. So what is Trump going to do? What's going to be Trump's war?
Probably Syria or North Korea, but
it looks like Syria might be it, but like I used to think that maybe, like, I mean, the US is already in Somalia, but I don't think it counts as a war. And they're already, like, they're helping Saudi Arabia attack Yemen. I was thinking maybe they could attack Yemen, but that might be too small. Like, Yemen and Somalia might be too small for them. Iran or North Korea would be too big. I think they can't really take them.
I'm not sure if it's, just to oppose the government, but, the Labour Party opposed the Iraq and Vietnam wars, but, like, I bet they opposed the Iraq War because it was unpopular, but, I was impressed that they imposed the Vietnam War because, that war was wildly popular with the Australian people at that time, the Australian electorate.
Really?
And, and that was Labour's worst ever defeat because they said, we won't send troops to Vietnam and we will abolish conscription. And they lost by the largest amount in history. That tells you about the intelligence of the Australian electorate.
Yeah, that is weird. Like, the Vietnam War was so
disgraceful, really.
Vietnam War was like so polarizing around the world. Like, I mean, it was such a genocidal war that it seems that a lot of the liberals opposed it. Not just communists. Like, it was opposed by so many people all across the board.
Yeah. In the end, so the Conservatives, who were pro-war, won 82 seats in that Vietnam election, while the Labour Party only won 41 seats. So that was an endorsement for the escalation of Australia's involvement in Vietnam. And in the end, 500 Australian soldiers died, and, quite a number of those were conscripts. So that was a disaster, not only for Vietnam, but also for Australia.
How would you describe Australian imperialism? Like, what does Australia do, and how imperialist would you say that Australia is?
Well, it backs imperialist powers. Australia is a legacy of imperialism. Like, even our indigenous people, their life expectancy is 10 years lower than the average Australians. Yeah, they really live in horrible conditions.
I find that that's something that people don't really grasp. They seem to think like, yeah, of course the US is imperialist because they attack everybody, but like, I mean, Australia does send troops to help the US. Like, did you send troops to Iraq?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did, of course.
Yeah.
Look up John Howard and George Bush. There's lots of cartoons, ridiculing their relationship.
So what about, like, do many Australian, like, big corporations, do they own, like, lots of things in third world countries?
Well, that was interesting. An Australian businesswoman, Gina Reinhardt, did a big talk in India. And she said that, do you know the Modi government in India? I think it's conservative.
Yeah.
She must have holdings in India because she praised away how the Indian government is pro-business or something. I think well, it's
yeah.
basically she's happy how how the workers are barely paid anything over there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, like and she said, "Oh, we should adopt these policies in Australia."
Oh, brilliant. Like, I mean,
Like she said things like, "Oh, Africans are prepared to earn $2 a day," or and so that's why people open businesses in Africa and not Australia.
oh, yeah,
Like,
right.
she says things like that all the time. She inherited the largest iron ore reserves in the world. Like,
Wow.
she didn't invent anything or something, but, so she, inherited the land from her father and thinks she's some great businesswoman.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, like, wouldn't natural resources, like, taking natural resources into public or collective ownership, is just common sense.
That's what I always say to people who accuse communists of not being patriotic. I'm like, I mean, we want the things, the resources and productive forces of this country to belong to the citizens of this country, like not some random rich guy, like let alone some foreign multinational corporation. Finland is pretty decent as far as imperialist countries go. Like it's not part of NATO yet. I mean, it might end up being part of it. Hopefully not. But I mean, Finland still, pays lip service to imperialism, of course. Even sends troops to help U.S. forces and U.S.-led coalitions to occupy countries. Of course, Finland, like recently, has participated in like all those big military drills, basically to provoke Russia.
And did they participate in the attacks on Libya?
No, I don't think so.
The Norwegians, I think, did a lot there.
Oh, that's horrible.
I'm not sure, I could be wrong, but...
Of course, Finland facilitates a lot of the things that America does in this part of the world. Last year, they had like drills with some American like fighter pilots and stuff like that. Finland has been doing like a lot of, they call it peacekeeping missions, but basically they send troops to like maintain law and order in countries that the US is occupying, like in Iraq and Somalia and Afghanistan. But the thing that people, like the most obvious thing about Finnish imperialism that people totally ignore is the fact that Finnish corporations and companies, they own like so many things in third world countries, especially in India, but also elsewhere, and they just exploit the shit out of those people. Of course, like Nokia, the phone company, the Finnish like big phone company, they used to have like massive factories, and maybe they still do in India, and they had horrible unethical business practices of like breaking unions and physically attacking like union organizers and polluting the environment. Imperialism is not just military activity, it's mainly economic activity. The military part comes in only when that is needed, that is necessitated by the economic part of it.
Finland owns a lot of, have great stakes in industries overseas.
Substantial amounts of things, but of course it's a very minor player, compared to other Western countries. Similarly to many Western countries, like the country has been largely deindustrialized, like they've moved a lot of...
Yes, we have a services economy.
Yeah, it's the same here. Like they've sent all the factories overseas, and
yeah, my grandfather worked in a factory, and he was shocked to see all the all the factories leave.
Wow.
All the factories moved, to the third world because the workers are treated like garbage there, basically, isn't it? Or
yeah, it's more profitable move them there. That's why they do it. But Lenin said that imperialism is when, like, one of the telltale signs of imperialism is when exporting capital becomes more important for a country than exporting goods, which is, it's kind of insane that he said that, because that's way more true now than it has been ever. Like, they've exported all the factories, all the capital, instead of, like, the UK doesn't export cotton anymore, they just export all the factories outright.
Yeah, yeah. It was really the 1980s that everything started moving overseas when China introduced the opening up policy that allowed all the foreign investors to create sweatshops over there.
I suppose like in the 70s, and after that they figured that South Korea is like ready for that they can also export things there, and I guess Taiwan and Bangladesh and those countries came a bit later.
I think it's a bit different in those countries though. They're smaller. They're funny sort of hybrid. Like they were planned economies with state-owned banks and state-owned steel mills, and like South Korea had one of the biggest state-owned steel industries in the world. I think it was called Pohang Steel. It's been privatized now, of course, but...
I mean, it could be that maybe they thought that if the country is like totally like semi-feudal, that they need to have like the key sectors of industry owned by the state, otherwise it's just going to be too much chaos.
Before they started that in the 50s, the South Korean economy was very unsuccessful.
Yeah.
The 60s they took control of a lot of industries, and the economy did far better after that. South Korea had a planned economy from 1961 to 1997.
In the same way that I know that India, for example, they had 5-year plans, or maybe they were 4-year plans, but like I don't exactly know what does that entail, because they still had capitalism, of course.
It was more like a wartime fascist economy, really.
Yeah,
like,
okay, so a command economy.
Yeah, like a war economy, really, where private industries directed by the government.
Yeah, I see.
In some matters, not all, though.
Yeah, of course. When it comes to Africa, like, of course, the imperialist countries, they have extensive, like, mining and logging operations in India and Philippines and places like that, Nepal, but Africa, it seems that in Africa they're just mining. I mean, there's like some parts of Africa where they kicked out all the farmers and people who grow food, and they've replaced them with like plantations that make tea or biodiesel or something. But it seems that Africa is still an untapped potential when it comes to moving factories and sweatshops over there, which is kind of worrying that the imperialism might still survive for a little while. If they figure out that Asia is too expensive, they can still move things to even cheaper countries in Africa.
If they ask to be, earn more than $1 a day or something. That's why people were so angry with Gina Reinhardt when she said, the workers in Africa are prepared to work for $2 a day, whilst the Australian workers,
Yeah, they're not. They don't even stop to think about the implications of that, because how can you have somebody make like a iPhone or something that costs like $600, and they pay the worker like $1 to make it, and then they pay like, I don't know, $10 for all the materials. The wages don't create enough buying power in the consumers. Like it is a disaster. Like the whole system is unworkable. You need to have workers that have money to buy these things, otherwise there's going to be a recession. That's
exactly
how this is like such an insidious system. The imperialists, they need the Western people to have more money to buy all these products, but I don't really know how that's going to be possible in the long run. Really, it's not. Of course, it's not. In Marxist economics, there's a thing called crisis of overproduction, which is something that always happens. They want to make more things faster and faster, cheaper and cheaper, but they don't want to increase wages at the same rate that productivity is increasing, so eventually there's not going to be enough products that are being sold, and there's no real way to fix that. What do you think is going to happen with Syria? Like, do you think that there's going to be an actual invasion, like with boots on the ground and all that?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I can't really picture it. Like, Iraq was a disaster, and
of course the US is in like crazy debt and all that, but I mean it was profitable for the military industrial complex.
Yes, but Trump spent his campaign claiming that he always opposed Iraq, but wouldn't he look even more foolish than he already does by
I mean, he would, but I wouldn't put it past him. I've always been very skeptical about Trump. Like, I've always thought that he won't do things any different from the previous presidents.
Well, he's governing like a typical Republican at the moment.
Yeah.
They really think he's like George W. Bush.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting that you say that, because the people that I've seen, they've just talked endlessly about Trump's, like, idiocy and incompetence and all that, and they've said that this is, like, truly never been seen before, and I've always thought to myself, like, this just seems so similar to Bush and even to Reagan. They want to get rid of Assad, but the real question is, what will Russia do? Surely they won't allow that.
Russia has a great nuclear arsenal, but, you know, since the fall of the Soviet Union, they're a lot weaker than they used to be.
Yeah, I don't know, like, Russia is a weaker imperialist, though, but, I mean, it is a very interesting situation. It's really hard to say what's gonna happen.
What about North Korea? What do you think Trump will do there? He'll just do the same thing as every other US president? So, put sanctions on North Korea, or...?
It seems like it.
It's funny, I can never picture the US invading North Korea.
Yeah, you really can't. Like, that's what I think, because they say that, like, no, Trump is just too dumb, like, he's gonna invade North Korea anyway, but I don't see that happening. But if he really was different from other American presidents, then he might... Like, do you remember the time when he was saying that he's gonna be more isolationist? He's gonna pull troops from South Korea, and he's gonna pull troops from all the NATO bases.
He wanted all the other nations to start pulling their weight in NATO. Yeah.
Of course, like, if he had done that, that would have been great, but nah, he's not gonna do that. I don't believe he will do that. Have to wait and see, I suppose.